There you go. I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Tuesday, June 23rd. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We're shooting for a different kind of enlightenment here. We kind of break the rules for Native radio. We don't do prayers and we don't do buffalo speeches. We don't do spirituality shows. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity, and we may step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. And we'll do it. We'll take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that's heaped upon us. And we do it all right here, live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind folks that our audio streams on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. We stream live video of the show via Facebook Live on our Facebook group pages, I should say. And we share them across a bunch of other group pages as well. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud, and we take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel. So the audio is available as a podcast, and the video is available as a YouTube video. I encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I am the show's host and producer, and I'm joined here in studio by Jake Proud, who is managing our audio and our video. Let's get into it. My topic or title for the show is This is Only the Beginning. And that is meant to be both encouraging and perhaps a little foreboding. So let me explain. There are a lot of people who, at this stage of the game, with the protests, with the statues toppling and being removed, some are already like saying, well, yeah, so what? Yeah, that's nice, but that's not real change, or enough of this already. I mean, look, they take a few racist marketing images like Uncle Ben's and Aunt Jemima, or even the Land O'Lakes logo, and you can hear certain people, especially white people, saying, "Well, now you're tampering with our history and what we grew up with, and all that other stuff." So there's a lot of discouragement. But I'm encouraged because we're seeing some things that, frankly, we've never seen before. We've complained about appropriation, cultural appropriation. Black people have, Native people have, but it's never really landed much change. We've complained about the statues, and we've complained about the misrepresentation and mischaracterization of history, but very little has changed. And today, between the Black Lives Matter movement picking up steam because of the murder of George Floyd and others, the combination of that, questioning police, the way the police have responded to protests with even more violence, the combination of that with a very racist president in the White House, there's just a lot of things that are coming together that are affecting change. Now, is it the big and substantive change that many of us want? No. But there's a part of it that says to me, these are small victories, but they're victories that encourage us. I mean, they are removing the Roosevelt statue from in front of the Museum of Natural History in New York. And it is among the most racist statues. It's got Roosevelt on a horse with a native man and I don't even want to say he's a slave. It looks like an African warrior or something. And they're both carrying guns for Roosevelt. I mean, it's a statue that is meaningless in the overall scheme of history because it never happened. But it shows, Roosevelt as the higher, standing high on a horse. He's got a beast of burden and two beasts of burden on either side of him in human beings. And that's being removed. Look, we've been throwing paint on the damn things. We've protested in front of the thing every year when we do the Indigenous Peoples Day gathering. That's and we do that gathering on Randall's Island in New York. There's usually some sort of connection between that and protesting at the Columbus statue at Columbus Circle and at the Roosevelt statue at the Museum of Natural History. And we've never seen this kind of change. These Confederate statues that are coming down, these, look, there are people who are toppling Columbus statues, Junipero Serra statues. And this is a guy who the Catholic Church has made a saint. And yet they're being toppled. Now, I know some people are going to say, yeah, but these are just symbols. But they're symbols that we have spoken out against for decades. And you know what? They're coming down. Some of them are being taken down by, city orders, and, politicians have, have moved to take them down. And others are coming down because the people are taking them down. They're toppling them. I think it was just yesterday, a group tried to pull the Andrew Jackson statue down in front of the White House. Unfortunately, they weren't successful, but the idea that people are that motivated to do something that, obviously is pissing off the President of the United States, which is always a good thing. But these, I'm encouraged by this because, like I said, these are kind of small victories, but they're victories nonetheless. And I'll tell you, as I look at the young people today, I've got to say, you do more than what we did. Because we didn't do enough. And I've said it before. I've said it here before on this show. So I still want to encourage young people to do more. And, when they look, when this current generation, and I've already, resigned to the fact that I'm kind of the older generation, but the current generation that is rising into power, I don't mean politically. I just mean, just as young adults and middle-aged adults that are really starting to take stock in their own power. They will recognize that we did some things, and I want them to top what we did. I mean, look, we fostered the sovereignty movement and pushing back, and and there were all kinds of things that were done. Everything from Treaty Council, AIM, warrior societies, White Roots of Peace. There were a lot of things that happened, and there were events. There was the Oka crisis, the pushback at Ganadage. I mean, us pushing back in Ganawage. There was a lot of things that took place. Gunyonge, Akwesasne. There were so many things that happened. I mean, coming up, fairly recently with Standing Rock. I mean, the BIA takeover back in in the 70s. There were so many things. Alcatraz. So many things that happened, but we never really accomplished all of our goals. And I'm not sure that any generation will, but it's important that we build a track record of success, not just resistance. Resistance has to mean something. So there has to be a certain level of not just resistance, but accomplishing something. And look, these statues and not allowing the misrepresentation of history to continue. I mean, look, we're fighting a lot of pushback from from racists and white people who don't even believe they're racist. They just are made very, very uncomfortable because we're disrupting what they thought was normal and what has been normalized to them, which is the misrepresentation of history. I mean, we tell the story of Columbus, and somebody suggested, well, maybe we need to write the plaques that go on these things. Well, I mean, if I wrote a plaque, I'd say, well, a famous rapist and genocidal murderer. I mean, one of the founders of the slave trade. I mean, I would list all of these terrible things, and then then what do you do at the end of that? After you list all these terrible things, what do you say? Oh, and by the way, he's also the symbol of Italian American heritage. Well, who the hell's going to want to claim those two things together? So we have the opportunity to add truth to a lot of these mischaracterizations of history. And when I say mischaracterization, I got to be clear. There are lies, omissions, and then there are the mischaracterizations. And I'm not even going to try to guess which there are more of, because I guess you'd almost have to say that there's more omission than anything. But when you do delve into a subject and then you lie about it, or you misrepresent it so significantly that it takes on a completely different meaning, we have to challenge that. They're not going to fix that stuff. They're not going to change that. I mean, I even saw some Native people post, try to tell the story of the woman behind Aunt Jemima. Oh, and now that history is buried. Well, you know what? The history has been buried the whole time. I never heard anybody tell me the history of Aunt Jemima until they took her off the package. And the reality is, It was blatant, stereotypical imagery that these companies, which ultimately would be, I think it was, is it Pepsi? Pepsi that owns it? Whatever company ultimately owned the brand, I guess. But this wasn't something that advanced some sort of African American prowess. This was just a marketing tool. So again, all I've got to say is that we have some success here, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it in so many different places. I mean, I'm actually a little surprised that so many things have come together. I mean, obviously the Confederate statues issue, has been, a fomenting issue for a while here, but all of a sudden we got attention on Columbus. It's even starting to get into things like the mascot issue. All of a sudden, the mascot issue is starting to get a lot of attention again. And you know what? I got to tell you, even there, I'm encouraged. Look, we have some real jerks, some that claim to be native, some who actually do have native ancestry, but they're so sold out that they're when they say they're not bothered by by the name of the Washington football team. That's one thing. But then you hear them say, "Yeah, but I really don't like all the dress up. I don't like the people." Well, wait a second. That goes hand in hand. These are some of the conversations that I'm having on Twitter. And I said, look, there's no native people who enjoy, who are neutral about the mockery that takes place with these mascots. I had somebody come back to me and say, yeah, but I don't think mockery is what they're doing. I said, what do you mean you don't think what mockery? And he says, I don't think the teams intend mockery. I says, it doesn't matter what the teams intend. What are the fans doing? They're putting on paint. They're putting on feathers. The cheerleaders are, little Pocahontas outfits. The fight songs, the sports announcers, the in-house sports announcers, the media, the whole thing is mockery. Yeah, the guys playing are men in tights. They're not wearing they're not wearing native outfits. They're not dressing up as native people. They're not the ones making a mockery, other than playing for a team with a name. But you have all of the fans and the opposing fans. I mean, I always have to cite the Philadelphia Eagle fan who impales a rubber Indian head, and hoists it up at the game when the Eagles play the Washington football team. But see, in having these conversations, I think winning a few people over, and we are clearly winning that battle too. High school after high school after high school is dropping not just the R word and the racial slurs, but the native mascot imagery in general. We're winning this thing. I mean, look, we see a few high schools making the news because they're trying to put a firmer stance against it, and obviously we see the Washington football team, trying to double down on the racial slur that they call themselves, but the Cleveland baseball team, kind of retiring imagery. They're keeping the name so far, but you're seeing movement. I mean, or I'm seeing movement anyway. And the more conversations, I mean, look, the conversation I have with somebody about the Washington football team is look, that Philadelphia Eagle fan, that should end the conversation. The fact that the NFL and and whether it's just the Eagle Stadium or whatever, allow a guy with a duffel bag with a fake sword and an Indian head and allows him in there, and not only is he allowed to hoist it up, that same guy got put on television not only as an Eagles fan but as a Philadelphia Flyers fan when they were playing against the Blackhawks. So and these names, Blackhawk, Braves, Indians, Warriors, obviously the R word, they encourage and invite the opposing teams, the opposing fans, to mock the name. I mean, with their, squaw, Pocahontas, all these things, scalp them, get ready for another Trail of Tears, all of these things. So as I'm having the conversation with some people who are really trying to say, look, it's not intended to be, look, don't tell me about intention. Let's talk about the reality of things. And the reality is our images are being mocked. They're being mocked by fans, for and against. They're being, I mean, signs being put up. When a team plays a team with a native mascot about alcohol and reservation and Trail of Tears. I mean, we see it over and over and over again. But because we're speaking out, we're actually having some success. Now, are we going to end racism? No. But we're going to put it in the box that it belongs in. And we're going to make sure that when somebody tries to argue against us about what is racist and what isn't racist, that we are more armed with more information, with more evidence, and shame some people. And we are doing it. Look, I also put a post up on Facebook this week where I made it clear that while I support Americans who are trying to fight for equality, especially marginalized U.S. citizens like black people and brown people, whoever, people of LGTB. I mean, whoever is oppressed, whoever the marginalized groups are, I support and I stand with you in your fight for equality. But I'm not fighting for my equality within the U.S. system. I'm not fighting for my constitutional rights. I reject their constitution. I reject their citizenship. So what I'm fighting for me and for my people is different than what I'm supporting others for. And I want to say that I'm not trying to diminish what other people are fighting for, the civil rights and all that. I'm not trying to disrespect that at all. Look, if you're a citizen of the United States, you should fight for everything that you're entitled to. I mean, although that's a slippery slope because some of what Americans claim to be entitled to is the stuff they took from us. So I guess there's a line there that I'm not prepared to cross here. But as far as equality goes, I mean, I supported both what Malcolm X stood for and what Martin Luther King stood for. But I also, supported what Muhammad Ali stood for. Rosa Parks, all of it. But again, I'm not trying to fight for my civil rights. I reject not only the Constitution, but any constitutional authority over us. I'm fighting for a free and independent existence. I'm not fighting for isolation. So when I say a free and independent existence, I mean that where we control our destiny, where we make our decisions, where we're not in a constant battle with states and federal governments, U.S. side or Canadian side, to fight for our distinction. I mean, I've brought up before. I talked about the Mashpee Wampanoag fight in trying to reclaim land. In trying to reclaim land using the fee to trust process, they literally have to not just prove that they are under U.S. jurisdiction and acknowledge and accept that they're under U.S. jurisdiction to get land and they can buy the land, but to have it classified as quote unquote Indian country, I know I hate the words, they have to prove, again, not just that they're under U.S. jurisdiction today, but that they were under jurisdiction 80 years ago in 1934. I mean, how bizarre is that? That in order to gain any level of distinction, you have to acknowledge, accept, submit to losing some of that distinction, especially as it relates to things like jurisdiction. See, this is the challenge. And look, I don't blame the Mashpee Wampanoag or the Shinnecock or some of the folks in the Carolinas who are fighting for state recognition or federal recognition. I get it. But I'm not fighting for that. I'm not fighting to be a tribe, band, or nation of Indians subordinate to the laws of the United States or under the U.S. Constitution. No, that's not what I'm fighting for. Now, I'll fight for the rights of others. And I'll march with Black Lives Matter. I'll stand up and I'll protest, and I'll write and I'll lend my voice and to some extent my body, I guess, to some of these good fights. But make no mistake about it. There is a little different goal here. And I wish I could help make a compelling argument that other marginalized people could stand in the same place that we're trying to stand as distinct people separate from them. But that's not going to fly. I wish that were the case. I mean, it would be great if black people could assert themselves as, as a distinct nation, or a distinct people. But that kind of counters everything from the segregation and separate but equal stuff. Because that all has a different flavor. But from a native standpoint, we have land. And although the federal government would like to claim that much of that land is held by them in federal trust, that's just that's just lip service, that they pay themselves. I know it's hard to reacquire lost land for many people like the Mashpee Wampanoag, but we have a lot of land that we're willing to defend, and we are willing to assert more and more of our regulatory and the lack of regulatory control by the federal and state governments, but more of our power and sovereignty over that land, even though the United States rejects that. I mean, I've talked about the 5 policies of the United States. The first being extermination, just to kill, and that's the first. But it never quite stops. Along the lines, there's the effort to assimilate and then remove Native people from their, push them out of the way. So there's, again, extermination, assimilation, removal. Then there's termination. Termination is when they can decide that we're no longer the distinct people that we claim to be. That we no longer warrant being identified. And this has been going on for a long time too. You had Native people who could only list themselves as black or white. They couldn't even list themselves as Native people. That's part of the North Carolina history and some of those southern states. So there's that, and then there's a whole lot of so-called tribes that were terminated. They literally had a process within the federal government to say, we no longer recognize, and this is the way they worded it, our trust responsibility to do, because you are now Americanized enough. So that's what termination was about. Then they began to adopt this notion of self-determination. But self-determination has different meanings depending on who's saying it. In the international community, when you talk about self-determination, it talks about being able to assert, governing authority, not just within your territory, but at your borders, or and how you represent yourself to other governments. The United States says, no, we don't mean, when we say self-determination, we just mean internal self-determination, that they can have members, not citizens, that they can have members of their tribe, not citizens of their nation. We're not going to recognize them as distinct peoples. We're going to recognize that they have membership in a group that is now completely subjugated. That's what the federal government recognizes as self-determination. And in fact, in their National Security Agency, put it more plainly, they said, we do not recognize the right of Native people to assert sovereignty over their lands. Wait, what? And let me say it again. The National Security Agency, they wrote that they rejected the notion that Native people could assert sovereignty over their lands. So, in other words, the United States is claiming sovereignty over our lands, even though they have no title to it. I mean, I've talked about from a Seneca standpoint, there is no moment in history where either the land or jurisdiction of the people was transferred to the United States. I don't care what the United States claimed. I mean, they can claim what they want, but there was no legal process where we surrendered land title, where we surrendered jurisdiction, or asked to be annexed, or asked to be, under their wing. And we have to really go at length to make sure that we say this properly, because there are people among us who have the story all screwed up. I mean, when I hear somebody lifting up the George Washington belt and say, well, this is the belt associated with the Canandaigua Treaty. No, it isn't. That belt symbolizes subjugation. It's not even ours. It was built. It was constructed by an Oneida craftsman under commission to George Washington. George Washington ordered that. It wasn't our representation of some sort of agreement. But we have our own people, and some of the iconic leaders, or I say leaders, but the iconic Native personalities out there who, they'll put feathers in their hair and go wear gustoas and headdress, and they'll walk around and they'll pose for pictures in Washington with this damn thing. It's a travesty. So, but the more voices, like mine and others who are trying to commit truth to not just to power, but to public, and say, look, understand what's really happening here. And when our voices, and I don't mean just mine, but when our voices start to have enough impact to bring Roosevelt statues down, to bring Andrew Jackson statues down. One of the guys who was considered, one of the main perpetrators of the removal policies. When even Lincoln statues are being, I got to thank Jake for posting that picture of the Lincoln statue in Washington, where he's got this subservient man on his knees, I think still in chains. And, from one angle, one of the angles of that statue, it literally looks like Lincoln is petting a black man like a dog. And there are people who are saying, hell no. Oh, hell no. We're tearing that bad boy down. So when Lincoln statues are being considered, viable targets for not only toppling them, but certainly, telling some truth about them. Columbus, this Juan de Onate, I don't know how to say his name, but anyway, this conquistador who was, murdered the native people of Mexico. His statue was toppled. The Roosevelt statue is being removed. I think about all of these things happening. These are successes. But again, this is just the beginning. And we're at the beginning of a lot of things. This COVID-19. The United States isn't out of the woods with this thing. The United States is racking up more cases per day still than any other country in the world. Brazil's starting to rack up a bunch of them, but I think only on 1 or 2 days has Brazil racked up a higher new case rate than the United States. In fact, today, today, the United States had the third highest in the whole time that this COVID-19 thing has been going on. It was the third highest day for new cases. Third. And, and this is the curve that's supposed to be down. I will say the death rate does seem to be down, but the new cases rate, it's going the other way. You've got California adding 6,000 new cases a day. You've got Texas adding 4 or 5. You've got Florida adding 4 or 5, or 3 or 4. Arizona, and even states like North Carolina and South Carolina that that you would not necessarily associate. In fact, other southern states, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, these states are all spiking with the number of cases. So that's just the beginning. I know everybody thinks, oh yeah, we got through the worst of it. I don't know that that's true. The economic impact of what's been shut down for 3 months. We're at the beginning of this thing. We don't know what it's going to totally do to not just to the U.S. economy, but the global economy. This thing is still crashing. It didn't crash a month ago or 2 months ago. Hell, the federal government kept printing more money and throwing it to you in the mail and in your checking accounts. You haven't suffered yet financially. I know some of you have. But as far as the real negative impact on the economy, we're at the beginning, folks. You know what else? You know what else we're at the beginning of? Hurricane season. Oh yeah, remember those? Yeah, this is the beginning of the hurricane season. And with climate change and with change, a new study came out and said hurricanes appear to be moving slower. now I got to clear this up. It doesn't mean that they're rotating slower. I mean, we're still talking about 3, 4, 5, number 5 rated hurricanes, but how slow they move. And you know what? That's worse. Why is that worse? Because the slower a hurricane moves, the more rain it dumps, the more flooding it causes. This could be an exceptional year for hurricanes. I'm not rooting for it. And because the most vulnerable people, people in the Bahamas and Puerto Rico, I mean, some of the most impoverished people on the planet are the ones who bear the brunt of this. And U.S. corporations just figure out how to make more money off of it. The Home Depots and, the bankers and the insurance companies, they just figure out how not to pay, how to collect more, policy dollars and pay less out in terms of settlements. I mean, it's disgusting. It's literally disgusting. So that's what's happening, and we still have the social unrest that is still spiking, and still going on because of, what got kicked off by the murder of George Floyd. This is really going to be interesting because you know what happens at the end of when some of these people get indicted, like the cop who shot I can't think of his name off the top of my head. I'm sorry. The guy in Atlanta who got shot in the back. Some of these indictments are not going to turn into convictions. So then what do? Do we raise hell all over again, or do we keep the pressure on every day? See, I did a show a few weeks ago and I said, don't let people tell you to stop. And I'll say it again. You got to ignore those people who are saying stop. You've got to keep the pressure on because there's a lot of injustice. There's a lot of injustice that needs to be sorted out. So we can't stop. And if we do stop, we run the risk of blowing the opportunity that we have for substantive change. I mean, the Minnesota state legislature, for all of the noise over, the police and the death by cop and the racism, they didn't vote to change anything. They actually went through their legislative cycle without anything, no banning chokeholds, nothing. So we have to keep the pressure on. Now the governor of Minnesota can call them back into session, but will that happen? Who knows? So we have to keep the pressure on. And I'm not just saying pressure. Look, by all means, pressure the politicians who still should be making some changes. But look, if you've got systemic racism, let me take it back. You have systemic racism in the police department. It's not the police officers. It's the whole system. And then it doesn't matter if you have black officers. The system is racist. It doesn't matter if you have a black chief of police. The system is racist. It doesn't matter if you got a black mayor, a black governor, or a black president. It doesn't change because that's just name tags. That's just, skin color changing. That's not changing the systems. That's where we have to come in. And we got to step up. We've got to step up every single day to stop the abuse. All right, hey, we're at the bottom of the hour, so I know we ran a little bit late, and I apologize, but we'll take a break. We're about halfway through, and we'll take a break and come right back. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native. All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Hey, I want to give a shout out to my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. I want to thank Eric White and ERW Enterprises and the folks at Grand River Enterprises and Native Wholesale Supply. I also want to thank the individuals, and there are, there's a number of them that on occasion will drop a check in the mail, and it allows us to, to do what we do here and sometimes expand a little bit more of what we're doing here. So we're always trying to improve the product a little bit, and sometimes that those attempts get us to start a little late. So I apologize, but trust me, we're always working to improve what we're doing here. So those who support the show financially, really enable us to do that. Those of you who support the show by watching, by sharing, by having the conversations that we're encouraging people to have, you're also a big part of what our agenda here is, what our mission is here. So I want to thank all of you for that type of support as well. Hey, I do need to make a correction. I said NSA. And Jake and I were talking off during the break. It was actually the National Security Council, which is, they're a little bit different. So this is a council that advises the United States on national security issues, and they were the ones who issued a statement basically saying that the United States does not, and they were speaking on behalf of the United States, that they reject the notion that that self-determination was not the international definition of self-determination, because when the United States uses that expression, they only mean internal, and they don't mean that they recognize our right to assert sovereignty over our own lands. So I mean, that's I want to clarify, because one's a spy agency and one is more of another federal bureaucracy, I guess. So, and the name, it was Richard Brooks, who was shot in the back by one Atlanta police officer, but there were two cops involved. So, as I said, we're only at the beginning of a lot of things, and I've talked a little bit about what may still come with just printing more money to dupe people into believing they can get through this, shutting down the economy the way they did and that kind of thing. It's going to be interesting to see when the piper has to get paid with all this and what it's all going to mean. And obviously, it's also another excuse for the federal government and the GOP in particular to throw a ton of money at their, at corporations. And even though if you help the people, that should help the corporations, but they get help both ways. They get help with direct, billions of dollars, and then you throw a bunch of money at people and you tell them to go out and spend it, and so the corporations benefit again. So it's, but there's a price to be paid for this. I'm not a believer in karma, but there is almost nothing you can do that involves an expense, and I don't mean just an expense of money, but an expenditure of energy or taking something, taking resource. There's consequence. There's something's got to reciprocate. Ultimately, there has to be some balance. And I'm not saying, all bad, evil people pay the price and all good people will, be rewarded. That's not necessarily the case, because it is not the individual. It's what man does and what man receives. So there's a cost to all this. And when that cost comes due, it isn't just those who benefited the most from creating that deficit. Everybody's going to pay for some of it. So part of the reason for the protest, part of the reasons for readying yourself is knowing that this is just the beginning and things are going to get worse. So while I say it's the beginning of us having success in terms of affecting change, it's also the very beginning of things unraveling. We wouldn't be at this moment if there wasn't an unraveling of the racist systems that exist. We wouldn't be at this moment if we weren't in the middle or at the beginning of a recognition about income disparity. I mean, we're really just at the beginning. And all the things that can get worse probably will get worse. So that's even more of a reason for us to stay active. I know people are going to tell you to settle down, stop toppling statues. I mean, Trump tried to make some statement about how he was going to lock people up for toppling statues. Trump doesn't have it. He doesn't have any of that kind of power anyway. So, I mean, look, is there a cost to to knocking a statue down, yeah, if you get caught doing it, there probably is going to be some sort of a cost. But we get through it, and we'll support you, and we'll do. Everybody will rally behind you. But this gets to another point, and I've talked about this on the show before. A lot of people are saying, well, we must only do peaceful protests. Well, there's a difference between a peaceful protest and a nonviolent protest. Toppling a statue may not seem peaceful, but it's not violent. Like I said, unless you topple that statue on top of people, it's not a violent act. So, and we saw this, with Standing Rock. We saw this in so many of these other places where our people have stood up. Sometimes you've got to do some things. You can't just, do prayer circles and burn tobacco and hold up signs. Sometimes you have to disrupt. And look, everybody tried to make a big deal and say, oh, this is all about riots. I didn't see as much, for all of the talk of rioting, I didn't see nearly as much as, frankly, I'd hoped for. I'm going to tell you. I mean, I would have rather seen some property destruction. I would have rather seen more statues toppled. I would have rather seen more police cars destroyed. I mean, I'm saying that. Of course, I wasn't in New York City, smashing windshields either. But a peaceful protest, if you're not prepared to be disruptive, which may not seem peaceful, but you can be disruptive and still be nonviolent. So when people talk about nonviolent direct actions, that's what we need to do until all hell breaks loose. And then other people have to make different decisions, I guess. Now, I'm not advocating an all-out war, but I got to tell you, and Jake was quick to remind me. For anybody who says you can't take on, the United States militarily or take on the police, I don't know. I've seen third world countries, pretty much hand it to the United States pretty good. Vietnam, Korea, Japan gave the United States, quite a bit of all that it could handle in many regards, considering it's a small, tiny little country in the midst of a major global conflict. As an insurgency, the people who are home, we can stand up. And I don't care if they call in the National Guard. I don't care if if Trump tries to use, some sedition act or whatever else, or whatever he's going to try to use to justify, using military against domestically. Be careful what you wish for. I mean, we're home, and I say this not just as Native people, but even people in the urban environment. If you're going to bring in National Guard from some place from a state where the people are totally unfamiliar with, places like Detroit or New York City, or Milwaukee or Los Angeles, well, good luck. I tell you, if I got to lay my money down, I'm laying it down on the people who live there, because they're going to know how to. They're going to know how to handle themselves in a conflict. So, look, I know this sounds really radical, some of the things that I'm saying, but I just don't think we can live in fear. I think we have to live with the hope that we can affect change. Because people don't rebel because they're being oppressed. They don't. They do not revolt because they're being oppressed. They revolt because they see an opportunity for change. Hope. They have an idea of where they want to go. They have a goal. So when we begin resisting, which you can start your resistance just based on oppression, and that's a good reason to resist. But when you want to really affect change, you got to have hope that you're going to achieve that change. Otherwise, we're all just really desperate, and I'm not trying to push people into a point of desperation. I want to push people to a point of hope, hope for change. And I've said it before. I don't vote, so I'm not gonna. There's no way that I'm gonna vote for change. And anybody who thinks you're going to vote or pray your way out of this problem, out of these problems, I mean, we've got a handful. Climate change. We have global conflicts. I mean, look, the United States, Trump is still, making overtures, aggressive overtures towards China. Well, that doesn't sound like a real smart thing to do right now. There's conflict still going on in Syria, in the Middle East. The United States is still talking about trying to do regime change in Venezuela. I mean, there's conflict everywhere globally. There's conflict politically within countries all over the world, including here in the United States. There is conflict socially, racism, anti-racism, police versus the public. The levels of conflict go from everything from neighborhood to nation to international. And I'm not making this stuff up. You only have to watch any little bit of news to see this stuff. We're still in I would say the middle, if not the beginning, of a global pandemic. It's not over yet. Look, there's no question that there was a lot more loss of life early on because of incompetence in leadership that allowed as many as 30% of those who have died of COVID-19 were in nursing homes and extended care facilities. I mean, how ridiculous is that? How ignorant is that guys like Andrew Cuomo and governors in New Jersey, 50% of the people who died in New Jersey were nursing home deaths. I mean, how do you not protect not only the most vulnerable, but the people who are already somewhat secluded? So, look, the death rate may be dropping, but the infection rate is still expanding. And it's expanding in other countries too, not just the United States. The United States, the infection rate hasn't slowed down, and anybody who suggests that the infection rate is or that the numbers are only rising because they're testing more, they're still not random testing. Everybody who gets a COVID-19 test right now is either somebody who has symptoms or was exposed to somebody who tested positive. That isn't even just random sampling. I mean, and if you did that, you'd find even more people who were asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. But when you see the numbers coming out of Brazil and still out of Russia, India is finally, I think India finally passed New York State with more cases than New York State. I mean, just wrapping your head around that. New York State, up until last week, had more cases than a country of 3.3 billion people. I mean, look, I know the numbers are only as accurate as, as the testing. So but still. So India is finally starting to either tell some truth or coming to own what COVID-19 is doing to their country. And so they're
1.3 billion.
1.
You said 3.3.
Oh yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. yeah. Well, yeah, 1 billion more people in the United States. That's I guess what I really should have said. Yeah, 1.3 billion people. Yeah, that'd be a really big country. But I mean, look, it is. The infection rates are spreading. I mean, South American countries, are really starting to get hit with this thing. And like I said, Pakistan, India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, these countries are all, the infection rates are still growing. I mean, this isn't slowing down any. So anybody who thinks that, we're over the hump, over the curve, not globally. And frankly, in the United States, like I'll say it again, today, the number of new cases today was the third highest recorded number of new cases since this whole thing started. The third highest. So it ain't over, folks. So when I think about everything that's coming forward, the last thing we need to do is to stop pushing for change. All of these things, including hurricane season and climate change, those are all the more reasons for us to do more and fight for more. Look, we've got to change some lifestyles. It's not enough to say we've got to change the system of police and defund the police. We have to, look, we all have to own some things here too about behavior. I mean, look, there was a time, and I don't mean just neighborhood watch stuff. I mean, there was a time that we as people would accept more responsibility for not just ourselves, but for the people around us. Now, we'll defend bad behavior. And look, and I'm not saying that if you do see bad behavior, that it warrants killing somebody. I mean, Richard Brooks didn't. I mean, look, he didn't want to get. He fought being handcuffed after being, he was going to be arrested for drunk driving, and he resisted arrest and took off. But he didn't. I mean, he just took off. He shouldn't have done it. And a day later, in a clearer head, he probably would have been full of regret. Maybe not remorse, but he would have been full of regret. But instead, he got shot in the back. So, but if the whole conflict between cops and the public wasn't so bad. So when I hear white people say, well, if you don't do anything illegal, you have nothing to worry about. Well, that's a load of crap. There are people who are, I mean, Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old kid with an airsoft gun. And he was killed by police. He wasn't asked, there was no warning. There was no talk him down and understand, okay, oh, it's a toy. All right, well, that's okay. No, shoot first and ask questions later. And they didn't even allow him to get first aid, get any medical treatment for like 40 minutes. The kid probably might have lived. And again, let me remind people, no convictions there. No convictions for Freddie Gray. No conviction for Eric Garner. No conviction for Sandra Bland. No. I mean, even when there was indictments, there was no conviction. So, if we all, here's what we learned with Freddie Gray. When the indictments came down, everybody stopped protesting. Everybody said, okay, they were indicted. And of course, none of them were convicted. So what did we stop protesting for? Why did we stop? I mean, I was on 7th Avenue in New York City, right after Freddie Gray. And then everybody went to sleep because they got indicted. It's not enough. The system is flawed. And that's not the only system that's flawed. Everything that we have come to know as normal because of capitalism, because of global dominance by the United States, we're going to come to learn that it's not normal behavior. I mean, it defies nature. It's an unnatural level of consumption. This idea that some people have these insatiable appetites for more and more and more. That's not natural. It doesn't exist anyplace else. There are no other species on the planet where the goal of that species is to accumulate so much that they kill off their own species. I'm not saying some species don't kill off other species, but what's happening with mankind is that we're jeopardizing our own lives because of consumption. Capitalism. The free market. You free my ass. So these are the things that we have to really consider. And these are the reasons that we can't stop. We've got to keep going. This is just the beginning. We've got more statues to topple. We've got more police departments to dismantle. We've got more systems of oppression. Again, the native word that has become so, catchy is decolonization. Well, decolonization isn't just about solving some of the problems of decolonization. It's unraveling. It's dismembering. It's untangling ourselves from the systems of oppression. Not trying to make those systems work for us. Not figure out. Let's replicate what the urban police departments look like, and we'll put them on the reservations. Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Why would we replicate a failed system? And yet we replicate their courts, we replicate their governance, we replicate their their police departments. We replicate child services. We replicate everything that they do that's wrong. We got to change. And we got to change for the better. And I say that not just as a Native person. I say that as a person who just feels strongly about what all of us are going through. Look, I want to thank you guys for listening. Hey, I am doing my New York show this week, so you can catch Let's Talk on WBAI, and of course streaming right here on Facebook Live. We'll do that Thursday at 3 o'clock, so you can catch a Regan DeLoggins and John Kane with Let's Talk on Thursday. We'll see you then. Yahweh.